At the turn of the 20th century, the Russian Empire was a massive state spanning 11 time zones. The Romanov family ruled this vast territory for over 300 years, maintaining an absolute autocracy that felt increasingly at odds with the modern world. That authority was embodied by Tsar Alexander III. He was physically robust, imposing, and ruled through a firm conservatism, suppressing any hint of revolutionary dissent. But when Alexander died unexpectedly in 1894, the crown passed to his 26-year-old son, Nicholas II, timid and unready. The new Tsar appeared overwhelmed, privately admitting, "I am not prepared to be Tsar. I never wanted to become one. I know nothing of the business of ruling." Nicholas reconciled his lack of training through a mystical devotion to the principle of absolute monarchy. He believed he was chosen by God to rule, and that his primary duty was to preserve the autocracy exactly as he had inherited it, viewing any request for reform as a personal affront to his divine mandate. While Nicholas looked backward to the 17th century, the rest of Russia was rapidly surging forward into the modern industrial age. Millions of peasants were moving into crowded cities, creating a new working class that faced extreme poverty and had no voice in how the country was run. The state was buckling under these new economic pressures. The greatest threat to the empire was the vacuum between this rapidly changing society and a leader who viewed adaptation as a betrayal of his oath to God. By 1905, that tension reached a breaking point. An outdated administrative system was failing to manage urban hunger, and the military was suffering embarrassing defeats against Japan. On a freezing Sunday in January, thousands of workers and their families marched toward the Winter Palace. They were not armed revolutionaries. They carried religious icons and portraits of the Tsar, intending to petition their ruler for food and basic civil rights. The Tsar's security forces responded with a massacre. Under orders to disperse the gathering, troops opened fire on the unarmed crowd, killing hundreds of civilians in the streets of the capital. The tragedy of Bloody Sunday shattered the centuries-old Little Father myth, the belief that the Tsar was the benevolent protector of the common people. In the eyes of many, he was now Nicholas the Bloody. The resulting nationwide unrest forced Nicholas to create an elected parliament called the Duma. However, he immediately issued laws to veto any legislation and dissolve the assembly at will, keeping the transition to a constitutional monarchy superficial. By choosing violent resistance and superficial concessions over genuine reform, Nicholas alienated the urban working class. This loss of trust in the capital laid the groundwork for his own destruction, turning the industrial centers into staging grounds for radical opposition. When World War I began in 1914, millions of Russian conscripts were sent to the front lines. The military was woefully unprepared, often sending soldiers into combat without rifles, food, or adequate leadership. In 1915, following a series of military setbacks, Nicholas made a defining error. Ignoring the unanimous warnings of his ministers, he left the capital to take personal command of the army. By becoming commander-in-chief, Nicholas linked the fate of the monarchy directly to the outcome of the war. Every defeat, every loss of territory, and every casualty was now personally attributable to the Tsar rather than his generals. This organizational vacuum paralyzed Petrograd. Without the Tsar's presence, an empty void appeared at the top of the imperial structure. That void was filled by Empress Alexandra and the mystic Grigory Rasputin, whose influence blocked the Duma and left the monarchy isolated. During the Tsar's absence, Alexandra and Rasputin presided over a period of ministerial leapfrog, dismissing competent officials and replacing them with inept loyalists. This instability destroyed the government's ability to address the looming famine in the cities. This command decision effectively severed the Tsar from his own government. By 1917, he had alienated the military command and the aristocracy, leaving him with no institutional allies. When the final crisis arrived in February 1917, systemic food shortages and war exhaustion reached a boiling point. Starving, desperate crowds began to riot in Petrograd, overwhelming the local authorities. When Nicholas ordered the Petrograd garrison to fire on the crowds, the empire suffered its final institutional failure. The soldiers, Peasant conscripts who sympathized with the protesters refused the order and joined the mutiny. Nicholas was stranded on his imperial train, isolated from his capital, surrounded by generals and Duma members who insisted his presence was now a threat to the war effort. He was told that abdication was the only way to prevent total collapse. On March 2, 1917, Nicholas II signed the Abdication Manifesto, ending the 3-century-old Romanov dynasty. In a final idiosyncratic decision, he abdicated for both himself and his sixth son, passing the inheritance to a brother who refused the crown the very next day. 1 year later, the former Tsar and his family were executed by the new regime in a quiet basement in the Ural Mountains. They died not in a grand battle, but as prisoners of the revolution they had failed to prevent. The Russian Empire crumbled from within, driven by a leader who fatally confused stubbornness with strength. His reign illustrates a harsh historical truth. In a rapidly changing world, the refusal to adapt is often just as destructive as malice.